hope journalists can stay on a whole bunch of stories that are coming out of this whole mess. The economic part of it, the virus part of it, the healthcare part of it, all these different things, and really follow them to the end and see what stuff at the beginning we were misled about, or assumptions were made that turned out to be true, and all these different things. And one of them is where this stupid virus started.
Indeed, and I think looking at it in a fair and kind of neutral way, just a curious way as opposed to a partisan way, is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what we're hoping to do with Josh Rogin, who's a columnist for the global opinion section of the WAPO, the Washington Post. He writes about foreign policy and national security and joins us now. Josh, how are you, sir?
Great to be on. Thanks.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thanks very much. So, this story is absolutely terrific and interesting and well written, first of all. But it appears it appears certainly that some of our diplomats were really worried about the lab security and the practices of a lab in Wuhan studying, get this, coronaviruses from bats. What worried them? What was going on there?
Right. Well, your setup was spot on. The origin story about the coronavirus is not just about blame or partisanship. It's about finding out exactly what happened, because that's crucial scientific information for how we fight the virus now and prevent the next pandemic in the future, which will surely come. Okay. And what the original Chinese government story was that it came from this Wuhan seafood market. And that was what people just basically went with for a while. But over the last few weeks, that story broke down for several interesting reasons. One, the market didn't sell bats. Two, the bats from the coronavirus are from like 1,000 miles away. Three, Chinese researchers pointed out that actually the first cases had nothing to do with the market, so it didn't come from the market. Four, they bleached the market, like the government, they sanitized the whole thing, which is the opposite of what you would do if you were engaged in a genuine forensic investigation into the market. And so people inside the government started to think, oh my God, the U.S. government, oh my God, what's the other possible theory? Oh, what about these two bat coronavirus research labs right next to the market? Could that be a thing? And they dug up this cable from 2018 from these experts who were so concerned about it at the time that they went to this Wuhan Institute of Virology, and they were so shocked by what they saw that they tried to sound the alarm. They tried to say, oh my God, this place is doing risky bat coronavirus research. It's not safe. And if we don't do something about it, there could be another pandemic that comes from this research from these labs. And now that we have a bat coronavirus pandemic coming from the lab, it's starting to make a lot of sense. It's not proof, but it's evidence.
So how close are the labs to the market that people were blaming?
So the Wuhan CDC lab, which is like the lower level lab at biosecurity level 2, which is better than your high school, but not a lot better. That one's 300 feet from the lab.
Really?
Now, Wuhan
wow.
Of virology is like 20 miles away. That's the BioLevel 4 lab. That's supposed to be the best of the best. But what the cables reveal is that the scientists there, even though they had this level 4 lab, told them that they couldn't keep it safe because they didn't have the right training. And what the U.S. diplomats were saying is hey, why don't we give them more training? But the training never came.
Now, Josh, we were joking earlier as we were looking ahead to your interview that the guys were using books to prop open doors to get a breeze through and whatever. But
wearing flip-flops and shorts.
Yeah, exactly. Bringing the bats home as pets. But did they have specifics on what they were not doing there?
Right. So, So again, and to be clear, it's just a theory. And the reason it's just a theory is because the Chinese government has suppressed all the information, silenced all the scientists, jailed all the journalists, withheld all the samples, shut down all the labs that were publishing the genomes. So we can't prove it because they don't want us to prove it because they'll never let us find the smoking gun if there is a smoking gun because that's the way they work. But in the end, either it came from there or it didn't, and the only way we can find out is if we get in there, and that's what these cables are calling for, is more investigation into what happened there so we can figure this out one way or the other.
It also makes more sense the way they responded with the stuff you just talked about, jailing journalists and doctors disappearing and all that sort of stuff. If a virus just kind of organically came out of nowhere, it's nobody's fault. These things have happened in world history. You wouldn't necessarily have to react that way. But if it actually came out one of your labs, which you have a responsibility for, and you're trying to promote to the world that your communist government, your communist way of life is the most efficient system possible, then you can imagine why you'd go to such great lengths to cover it up.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, I wouldn't discount the fact that they would jail journalists and doctors even if they weren't responsible, because that's just how they do business. In the Chinese Communist Party system, there's no bad news. There's no,
Gotcha.
every crisis is buried. Every whistleblower is disappeared, no matter what the story is. But I do think that over the last 8 weeks, after they started suppressing the information, they started to realize that the seafood market story wasn't catching on because it didn't make any sense. And that now they've ramped up. And just last week, they ordered all Chinese researchers to get official government approval before printing anything about the virus origin. So now they know that everyone's onto this story. And we don't know what they know, but we know they know more than they're saying and more than we know. And that's the problem. So you add like a closed dictatorship that's, has no free information flow, that doesn't respect, free and open society's desires for things like shared public health, and then you add this extra question, and it creates a question that we have to solve because it's a life or death issue for us.
Yeah, I saw a quote from I think it was the CIA. It was one of our intelligence agencies, being quoted in a newspaper that they think that Chairman Xi, Dictator Xi, might have been as misled as the rest of the world, and just the way the whole communist system works. They hid it from him as much as they hid it from us.
Right, and to be clear, it's not, our intel agencies don't know everything either, right? And
Sure.
There are huge intel gaps, and they're searching for these answers, but they haven't found them, right? But yes, imagine you're like a Chinese scientist and you find out that something horrible happened in your lab. Are you going to report it to the local Communist Party boss? No, because that's the end of your life, okay? And same thing if you're the local communist guy. Are you going to report it up to Beijing? No, because that's the end of your life. So this is part of the problem of having a closed, corrupt system, is that the incentives are all for everyone to hide everything all the time. Nevertheless, we can't absolve Xi Jinping of his level of responsibility because he set the policy that prevented them from sharing this information with the international community once
Sure.
they did know it. He's been hoarding the PPE. He's been extorting the international community to shut up if they still want their medical equipment that they're still holding. So even after the first set of cover-ups, the cover-ups continue, and those fall squarely in Xi's lap.
We're talking to Josh Rogin, columnist for the Washington Post. And listen, call me a bitter old cold warrior if you want, Josh. But as you pointed out, a number of the sins and crimes are just in the very nature of a communist regime. And as he runs a communist regime, I'll just fault him for that. He's running a regime that will yield nothing but misery and death. Having said that, I really appreciate your measured approach on this is evidence, it's not proof. But if one of my golf buddies gets radiation poisoning and I'm using uranium golf balls, I mean, that's pretty good proof. And the fact that there was a bat coronavirus lab that was run shoddily right where this thing exploded, that's pretty damn solid. I mean, it wasn't good enough to convict OJ, but it's pretty good.
It's a circumstantial case that grows larger and larger by the day. And, to your point about partisanship, listen, opposition to dictatorship and repression and human rights violations and atrocities and the suppression of science, that should be a bipartisan consensus. There should be one thing we should be able to agree in this country is that, freedom and human rights and democracy are good, and those things are bad, and all of a sudden Americans are realizing, the polling shows this, that it's not just about feeling good and having, a good idea about the way the world works. It's about saving our lives. That's what the pandemic has brought to the fore in stark reality.
Josh Rogin of the Washington Post, A+, brother. Terrific job.
That was really good.
Great writing. I hope we can talk again.
Thank you. Anytime.
All right. Great. Thanks.
It's
How
amazing.
good was that?
Very good. It's amazing that communism continues, though, because Xi came up in that system. Most of the higher-ups grew up under communism. They know how it works. How come they don't understand how faulty the system is?
I think he probably spends all day, every day trying to make it better. Because he understands, the success of the regime and the actual happiness of the people is how he holds on to power. Meanwhile, you cover up like a madman. I think he probably tries as hard as he can. It's just the nature of the system. It is utterly horrific.
If I'm gonna disappear into a work camp or be killed, if I report the truth and it's bad news, I'm never gonna report bad news. It's not really very complicated.
Yeah. We're eating lunch at the same table where we dissect the bats. Is that a problem?